Hello everyone and welcome back to another video. Today we're going to be making some spaghetti and meatballs with some nice pull-apart monkey bread. This is a delicious episode that you won't want to miss. As always, all the recipes are going to be down in the description down below. So let's not waste any time and let's jump right in.
We need like another camera. That's the convenience of Sean.
So the first thing we're going to be making today is some fresh pasta, for which I'm going to start with a nice big bowl that's on a scale. First up, we're going to add 225 grams of all-purpose flour into the bowl. Now we're going to add a pinch of salt and give that a tiny whisking. Now we are going to take the flour and make a well in the center. It doesn't need to be perfect, just as long as there's a hole in the center where you can crack in your eggs. Just like that. Now we're going to take a fork and we're going to pop the yolks and start to mix that up. What we're going to be doing is, as we're mixing up the eggs, we're going to be slowly incorporating a little bit of flour a bit at a time. The reason why we're doing this is we want to slowly start to form a batter, and the reason we're doing this inside of a bowl, you could do this on the tabletop, is it just makes it a lot easier. So let's get started. Now once you've got yourself this sandy consistency, we're going to flip this out onto the counter and start kneading it by hand using a bench scraper. Alright, now we're going to start kneading this by hand. You just want to knead this until you have a dry, slightly bouncy piece of dough. Now the hydration level and flour level that you're going to need for this dough is going to depend on a million different factors. So don't be afraid to add a little bit more flour if it's too dry, like it is for mine. Now we have our ball of dough that is nice and smooth, it's slightly bouncy, and it's completely dry, which means that when you press into the dough, it does not come off onto your hands. This is exactly the texture that we want. Now we need to let the gluten network rest for about 30 minutes by wrapping it in plastic wrap and setting it aside at room temperature. Now the dough is rested for 30 minutes and we are ready to roll it out. So we're going to start by unwrapping it. And what you'll find is that you have a nice hydrated dough. So we're going to take a bench scraper and cut this into quarters. This is going to give us some much more manageable pieces of dough and is going to make our pasta not too massive in the end. So we're going to set 3 pieces of this aside and cover with a clean kitchen towel in order to prevent them drying out. Now we're going to take a rolling pin and just roll this out slightly so it can fit inside of this nice cheap pasta roller. Now, before even thinking about putting this through the pasta roller, we need to make sure that this isn't going to stick by liberally dusting it with flour. So we're going to put some underneath, as well as some on top. Now that we've got this dusted, I've got my machine set to the widest setting possible. We're just going to start by passing this through. And there we go. Now that we've got this rolled out once, what we're going to do, we're going to make this thinner and thinner by 1 increment each time, passing the dough through once until the dough is slightly see-through. I'll show you what I mean when we get there.
Before it gets away from you?
Yeah. I'm just going to repeat all of that with the 3 other pieces of dough and then we'll get it cut. Okay, now as you can see, all our pasta has been rolled out. I don't know if this really shows through the camera, but as you can see, my fingers are slightly see-through through the dough. So we are going to take one of our pasta sheets out, keep the other ones nice and covered, And then we are going to generously flour it to make sure it doesn't stick inside the machine once again. And now we are going to roll this through the pasta cutter spaghetti attachment.
Oh, that's pretty.
And now we're going to take our pasta. We're going to gently fold it into a nest on the counter and add another liberal dusting of flour and tossing that around so it doesn't stick. Then we're going to take this and set this aside on a parchment-lined baking tray and repeat with the rest of our dough. Oh, it smells so good. Alright, now it's time to make some garlic compound butter, starting with a whole brick of 450 grams of butter. Now we're going to take this whole brick of butter, drop it into a nice big saucepan, and put it over medium heat and melt it nice and gently. Okay, now that our butter is nice and melted, I'm going to add one whole head of garlic into the pot. And we're going to let that cook for about 2 or 3 minutes just to let the garlic infuse into the butter. And since I'm using unsalted butter here, I'm also going to add a pinch of salt. Okay, now our butter is ready to go. We're just going to grab a bowl that is big enough to fit all the butter with some nice cheesecloth over top. Now we're just going to pour this over top the cheesecloth and lift out the cheesecloth. And let all of that good butter drain out. And here we have our garlic compound butter ready to be used.
Yeah. He found you.
We're going to get started on the pull-apart garlic bread, for which we're going to start with 320 grams of milk. Now we're going to throw this in the microwave for about 10-15 seconds just to warm it up a little bit. Now that we've got our milk gently warmed, we're going to add 8 grams of yeast to it. Now we're just going to set that aside and let the yeast bloom for about 5 minutes. Now we're going to get our dry ingredients mixed while the yeast blooms, starting with 500 grams of bread flour, 15 grams of salt, and finally 60 grams of sugar. And now we're going to just give this a whisk just to get this all incorporated. Now that we've got the yeast bloomed, we're going to take our bowl of dry ingredients, add it to the dough hook stand mixer, lower the head, and turn it on to a medium speed. And then we're just going to stream in all of our milk mixture. Now we're just going to let the machine run, incorporating the flour slowly and forming a dough. Okay, now that we've got our dough nice and mixed, we're going to check the gluten development by trying out the window pane test. Alright, beautiful. Now we've got 100 grams of softened butter that we're going to add in stages. I'm just going to add that to the dough and knead on a low to medium speed until the butter is fully incorporated. Once that's done, we're going to add the rest of the butter. And once that butter is nice and incorporated, we're just going to add another pat of butter. And we're going to add our final third of butter. Now we've got our dough nice and ready. It's supple, bounces back, and extremely smooth. That's exactly what we were looking for. So we're going to remove this from the bowl and form this into a taut ball by stretching it out and tucking in the sides like this. And then placing it seam down on the counter. Then we're going to rest our hands on the counter while applying pressure to the ball and twist it like this. As you can see, it's going to pull it taut into a ball and is going to close up the seam at the bottom. Then we're going to take a nice large bowl and drop that in. Now we're going to cover that with plastic wrap and let it rise for 1 hour or until doubled. Now our bread has doubled in size. Now the first step is going to be taking your fist and punching the life out of this dough. Now as you can see, it's going to deflate. Then we're going to turn this out onto the work table. And we are going to separate this into golf ball sized pieces. So we're just going to use a bench scraper, cut off a bit of it, and form it into a nice ball. And we're going to repeat with all the dough. And be a different. Bye.
like,
Please. Okay, and here are all of our balls ready to go. Now we're going to take a loaf pan and we are going to generously brush it with our melted butter. Now that our pan has been generously buttered, it's not going to stick to the inside. So we're going to start placing the balls inside. But before we do so, we are going to take the ball and we are going to dunk it inside of the molten butter. And then place it in the pan. And we are going to repeat that with all of the dough. And you don't need to arrange this all neatly, just throw it in the pan, it'll all be nice in the end. Now that we've got that done, we're going to take that same clean kitchen towel, cover it, and let it rise for 45 minutes or until just about double. We're also going to preheat the oven to 350 degrees. Now our bread has proofed. Now the last step before putting this into the oven is to grab a little bit more of our melted garlic butter and brush that generously over top, taking care not to deflate all that air that's inside. And now we are going to take this and place this into our preheated 350 degrees oven for 30 to 35 minutes or until the interior reaches 200 Fahrenheit and the top is nice and brown. Okay, now our bread is out of the oven. I ended up having to reduce the temperature to 300 and covering it with aluminum foil so that it didn't brown too quickly. You want to take a temperature probe, insert it into the thickest part of the bread, and you want it to register 200 Fahrenheit. That's how you know that your bread is fully cooked through. While it's still warm out of the oven, we are going to give this a brush with our garlic butter. That's going to give it that glossy sheen that just makes it so attractive. Now we are going to set this aside and let it cool until it's manageable for about 20 minutes. Now that our bread has cooled to a handleable degree, it's time to get it out of the pan. So we are just going to take it, invert it into our hand, and look at that. Now we are just going to flip this back over and lay it back down on the wire rack. And that is our garlic bread ready and finished. So we're just going to set that aside and let it cool fully or until we're ready to eat it. Now we are going to make the meatballs, starting by making a panade. So we're going to start by getting some nice Italian breadcrumbs and adding half a cup into a bowl. Then we are going to add 2/3 of a cup of milk. Now we are going to mix that up and let that sit for the breadcrumbs to absorb the liquid while we get our vegetables ready. Starting with a 1/4 bunch of parsley that we are just going to roughly chop. So we're just going to bunch this up and roughly chop this. Then we are going to take one nice small shallot and we are going to finely dice it. You could also use a 1/4 of an onion if you prefer. And finally, we've got 3 cloves of nice big garlic that we are going to pass through a garlic crusher.
Isn't it a garlic squeezer?
Now we've got our panade ready. So we are going to take our vegetable mix and add that to the panade. And now we are just going to mix that up. We're going to add about 1 or 2 tablespoons of salt and the same amount of black pepper. And now give that a stir. Should look a little something like this. Now we are going to add 1 pound of ground beef. And the final ingredient is going to be 1 whole egg. Now what we're going to do is we're going to mix this up nice and well with our hands, but you want to make sure not to over mix this, because if you keep over mixing, you'll get the texture more like meatloaf than a meatball. So we're just going to get in with our hands and mix that all up. And here we have our meat paste that is ready to be formed into balls. Okay, now it's time to form this meat paste into meatballs. So we're going to go ahead and take about 3 ounces and rub it in between our hands to form a ball. These don't need to be exact. We're just going to take these and put them on a baking tray lined with parchment paper and repeat with the rest of our balls.
That's right. Yeah, they're my mac and
And here we have our meatballs that are ready to be seared. Now the next step for our meatballs is going to be to sear them on two sides. Don't worry if the meatballs are still raw after this, because we're going to finish cooking them inside of the sauce. So let's get this pan preheated over nice high heat. And we are going to add a touch of oil. Once your pan is nice and preheated, we're going to take meatballs and we are going to fry them in stages. It's very important not to overcrowd. Now I'm going to lay this down, and you want to hear a nice sizzle when you do so. Now we are going to let these fry on this side for about 3 or 4 minutes, or until a nice deep brown crust is formed. Now our meatballs have been sizzling for a few minutes, and as you can see, we've got some nice dark brown crust. So we are going to flip these and do the exact same thing on the other side. And now that we've got a dark brown crust on each side of the meat, we're going to remove this onto a plate and repeat with all of our meatballs.
It's a tomato.
Now it's time to get started on the tomato sauce. So I've got 2 kilograms of beefsteak tomatoes here that we are going to start by concassing. You're going to take a nice sharp paring knife, put your thumb about 1 centimeter below the edge of the blade, and we're going to take the tomato, insert the knife just around the core, and do a circle all around the core. What that's going to do is allow you to just remove the core without wasting any of the flesh. Then we're going to flip this over and put a nice deep X into the bottom of the tomato. Just like so. Now we're going to repeat with all of our tomatoes.
Drumsticks are heavy.
Now we've got all of our tomatoes ready to go, as well as an ice bath, as well as a pot of simmering water. So what we're going to do is we're going to take the tomatoes, we are going to drop them inside the simmering water, and let them cook for 30 seconds to a minute each. And once the minute is up and the skin starts peeling off from the tomato, we're going to remove them and immediately drop them into a bath of ice water. And once the tomato has cooled down to a handleable degree, we're just going to take the skin and it's going to peel right off. And now we have a skinless tomato. Be careful because these are very slippery. And now we've got our peeled tomato that we are going to quarter. Once you've got it quartered, we're just going to take the knife. You're going to run it along the inside, just like this, removing all of the seeds. And what you're left with is some perfect tomato flesh that is ready to be used. We're just going to dice this up roughly and then use it for our tomato sauce. Don't throw these cores away. This is perfect for making something like tomato soup. It's perfectly good to use. We're just not going to use them in this recipe. Okay, now the next step for making tomato sauce is going to be to get all of our vegetables cooked. We have 1 rough diced red onion and about 4 or 5 cloves of garlic just thinly sliced. So we're going to get this pan over medium heat and add a good glug of good olive oil. Then we are going to add in our onion, as well as a strong pinch of salt, and then we are going to let that sweat over medium heat until the onions are translucent. Okay, now our onions are nice and translucent, so we're going to grab our thinly sliced garlic and we're going to add that. Now we're going to stir that up and cook that for about 1 minute or until the garlic is very fragrant. And now that the garlic has been sizzling for 1 minute, we're going to grab our tomatoes and add those into the pot. And now that our tomatoes are in the pot, we're going to add another good amount of salt, some freshly ground black pepper, and about 1 tablespoon of granulated sugar. The sugar is going to curb the acidity of the tomatoes and is going to create a nice mellow flavor. And now that this has been cooking for 2 or 3 minutes, the tomatoes are starting to soften. You could definitely keep cooking this and break down the tomatoes that way, but I'm going to use an immersion blender to make this completely smooth. It's also an excuse to use this because it's a Christmas gift from my mom. And now that we've got our sauce completely smooth, we're going to take our half-cooked meatballs and nestle them into the sauce. And And now that we've got our meatballs in there, we are going to cover this and let it cook for around 1 or 2 hours, or until the sauce has developed nice flavor, has reduced, and has a nice thick consistency. All right, now we have our sauce that has been simmering for about 1.5 hours, and the consistency is nice and thick. Here we've got our fresh pasta that has been boiled for around 1 to 2 minutes or until al dente. We're just going to add that into the sauce and then toss it together with a pair of tongs. And our spaghetti and meatballs is ready. So now all that's left to do is to plate this up. Okay, now it's plating time. So it's going to be very simple. We're just going to take our tongs, twist up a nest of these pasta, and just drop that in. Then we are going to flank that with 1 or 2 meatballs and give that a generous grating of Parmigiano Reggiano cheese. And finally, we're going to tear off a few pieces of this garlic bread. Just like so. And the final step that we're going to do for this plating is we're just going to take a little drizzle of olive oil and throw that on top. And there we have it, fully homemade spaghetti and meatballs with some garlic bread. So let's go ahead and taste this. Okay, now it is time for the taste test. So let's get started by eating some of the spaghetti. Cheers. This is very delicious. It's salty, it's rich, you get a little bit of acidity from the tomatoes, but it's not too much because of that sugar we added and the amount of cook time that it has. You get a little bit of extra saltiness from the Parmesan cheese, and you get that signature bite from the pasta. This is absolutely incredible. Now let's try one of the meatballs. Cheers. Those meatballs are extremely tender, they're moist, they're rich, they're flavorful. You get all of that allium flavor, you get the saltiness, you get the richness, and the parsley just comes through, gives it a little bit of brightness, a little bit of herbaceousness. It's absolutely incredible. And finally, the garlic bread. The bread is soft, it's extremely fluffy, it's light, and you get that little hint of garlic flavor that pops through and just brightens the whole thing. You have the richness from the butter. This is absolutely incredible, and I recommend that you make it too. As always, recipes are down in the description below, and this is going to be it for this video. So I hope you enjoyed, and I will see you next time. It's burning my hand, I gotta switch hands. Put my hand underneath it so you don't get injured. Ow, 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 ow.
God, you're fucking stupid.
Do the stand mixer with the dough. That's satisfying. So we're gonna set this pan over nice high heat. This pan doesn't work with induction. But I'm going to use. Bruh.
Do you want some help?
The bread is soft, it's fluffy, it's voluptuous. Voluptuous? That's not the right word.
Thick.